almost exactly 1 year ago that I purchased this camera, the full frame Nikon ZF. Since then, I have put tens of thousands of frames through this camera. And with the exception of my Ricoh GR, which is my walk around pocket camera, I have used the Nikon ZF more than any other camera these last 12 months. So in this video, I want to do a kind of 1 year review. I'm going to talk about what I like about the camera, what I don't like about the Nikon ZF, some of the controversies surrounding this camera, and also who this camera is for. And I'm also going to explain why when I bought this camera, I ended up getting more than I bargained for. I have to start with the obvious, and that is the retro design. Nikon has been making beautiful cameras for decades, and the ZF's aesthetics and its tactile experience are inspired by some iconic Nikon film cameras like the FM2, the FA, the FE2. And some of that inspiration in the Nikon ZF is obvious in the design. The electronic viewfinder is reminiscent of those angular pentaprism housings. And you also have the dials up here, of course, for shutter speed and for ISO. But some of the other throwbacks are less conspicuous. The Nikon logo here is from the 70s and 80s. The top display window, which shows you your aperture, reminds me of the film counter window that would tell you how many exposures are left on your roll of film. And something that I noticed only when I was preparing for this video is just look where the exposure compensation dial is on the top of the camera. Doesn't it remind you of the placement of the film advance lever on those old cameras? And I had not actually made that connection before. One of the controversies surrounding this camera is its retro design, and I don't understand why. Don't get me wrong, I get that this design may not be for everyone, but I see that as a matter of personal preference, whereas some people online make it almost akin to a moral issue. I was the books editor for a magazine for a long time, and the best rule for book reviewing that I heard was from John Updike, and it went something like this: try to understand what the author was trying to do, and don't blame him for not achieving what he did not attempt. And so for me, the question isn't, should Nikon have made a full frame camera with retro design? The more interesting question is, did they achieve what they attempted? And really the most important question of all is, do I like what they achieved? And for me, the answer is yes. The overall look, the attention to details, the subtle nods to the great cameras of the past, what Nikon has done, I think it has done very, very well. And I don't experience this design as sentimental or pandering or self-consciously hip. And here's the thing, you actually don't have to use the dials to set, your ISO and your shutter speed. If you don't want to, you can do all of that using the command dials just like you would on most other mirrorless cameras. And I actually go back and forth, depending on the situation and my mood. The build quality of the ZF is great. After a year of extensive use, my camera still basically looks like new. The camera feels very premium. The body is made out of mostly magnesium alloy. I admit I don't really know what that means, but what I've read is that it's light and it's durable. Whereas the dials, the shutter button, on and off switch, like these are all made out of brass. And over time, the brass is going to develop a nice patina. I've seen people online speed up that process by removing the paint with sandpaper. I admit that it does look pretty cool, but I am not brave enough to take a piece of sandpaper to my expensive camera. Something else I appreciate about the ZF is that unlike the crop sensor ZF-C, which I do like a lot, the ZF is fully weather sealed. I love shooting the ZF-C in good to moderate weather. The ZF-C I think of as a great summer camera, but I would not subject it to the same conditions as I do my weather sealed cameras, and I feel comfortable using the ZF in pretty much any conditions. The ZF inherited the same X-Speed 7 processor as Nikon's flagship cameras, the Z9 and the Z8. My first Nikon mirrorless cameras, not just the ZF-C, but also the Z7 II, they used the previous generation, the X-Speed 6. And according to Nikon, the X-Speed 7 sensor is 10 times faster than its predecessor, and I believe it. And here's what that means to me practically. First, the autofocus on the ZF is better, and I mean night and day better than those other cameras. I was actually never a hater on the autofocus capabilities of the previous generation of Nikon mirrorless cameras. They did pretty well for me in almost any use cases, but the autofocus in the new X-Speed 7 cameras is a huge upgrade. It's faster, it's more accurate, it's more versatile. It has 3D tracking, which, as you will see later in this video, I've used a ton in lots of different circumstances. The autofocus has AI-powered subject detection for people and vehicles and animals, and now birds. I am still not going to be a hater on the Nikon's older autofocus performance, but friends, the difference is real. It just is. Some other aspects of performance that I've noticed. The in-body image stabilization is fantastic. Its 8 stops of stabilization are actually better than a Z8 or Z9. I have gotten acceptably sharp images handheld down to shutter speeds of 1 full second. Nikon says that the ZF is the first camera to offer what they call focus point stabilization. Typically, in-body image stabilization is aligned with the center of the frame, but what focus point stabilization does is it adjusts the IBIS to align with the selected autofocus point wherever that focus point is on the frame. So, like your focus point could be in the top right-hand corner, and it would align around that and not just around the center. I can grasp what that means, but I confess that I don't fully understand the tech. I'm just a user. And as a user, what I can say is that the stabilization on the ZF really is excellent. One feature I have not taken advantage of yet, but that is offered in the ZF, is called pre-release capture, which allows you to capture up to 1 second of action that occurred just before you press the shutter. This sounds like magic to me, maybe time travel. And I do want to try it soon. I can see this being really useful when photographing birds and wildlife and sports. A feature I have used a little is called pixel shift shooting. This captures multiple images by shifting the sensor slightly in order to create a higher resolution image. I think it's up to 96 megapixels. This works best with static subjects like architecture and landscapes and still life. But here's an example of a pixel shift image that I took at a lake last summer near Mount Hood when I was first experimenting with the feature. The menu system here will be familiar to anyone who has used a Nikon DSLR or mirrorless camera recently. The menu structure is well organized by category. It's consistent across all their models. If you're coming from another system, of course, there will be a learning curve. One of the other controversies about this camera is that it has a flip out screen. People seem to love or hate flippy screens. I don't mind it on the ZF, especially because I use this camera for filming YouTube videos and for making videos for work. And that screen is actually really helpful for me when I need to make sure that I'm in frame and when I'm in focus. The back screen and the EVF on the ZF are both really good. I recently picked up a new camera. It's my first Fuji camera, actually. It's this little X-M5 that is filming me right now. And there was a bit of a shock when I started using the screen on the Fuji. And I think that's because I had been spoiled by the ZF. The back screen on the ZF has double the resolution of this little Fuji X-M5. And both the rear screen and the EVF on the ZF are comparable to, and really they may even be the same as the rear screen and the EVF on the much higher end Nikon Z8. A third controversy about the ZF is related to internal storage. The camera has 2 card slots, which you insert down here in the battery compartment. The primary slot accepts full-size SD cards. The second slot accepts micro SD cards. There are a few critics online who wish the camera's primary card slot was for CF Express. I get that. But a lot of people hate the use of micro SD in the second slot. The micro SD is slower, it's awkward, it's easier to lose, but I actually don't mind it. In 1 year, I don't think I've ever removed the micro SD card from this camera. I think of it as internal storage. And so if I ever forget to put in an SD card, I will have the micro SD in here to use in a pinch. A minor inconvenience with the Nikon ZF is that it doesn't have a way of saving different user profiles. On some cameras, you might have, a C1, C2, or C3 profile on a dial, or maybe you'll have different shooting banks in the menu. And with those, you can very quickly transition to your preferred settings. You don't really get either of those options with the ZF. And actually, there's really only one function button here on the front of the camera. So while there are lots of ways to customize the ZF internally, there are limited ways to save those customizations. This has not really bothered me, but I do think it is worth mentioning. Simply put, the image quality of the ZF is outstanding. The 24.5 megapixel sensor strikes a great balance. It's sharp enough for large prints and some cropping, but not so big that my files become unwieldy. Nikon colors, always great. The dynamic range here is impressive. I can easily recover detail in the shadows and the highlights without the files falling apart. The high ISO performance on this camera is super solid. I am comfortable shooting well beyond ISO 6400, and I'm rarely applying noise reduction in post. Not only have I shot at night with the ZF, I've shot sports at night, including soccer matches where I didn't want to compromise shutter speed, and I got perfectly usable shots at 9,000, 16,000, even 18,000 ISO. I've not fully tapped into the ZF's video capabilities yet. I use it to film most of my YouTube videos these days. I use it to film courses for work, but I know that that's just scratching the surface of what I've heard this camera is capable of. The ZF shoots 4K up to 60 frames per second. It can do 10-bit internal recording with N-Log if you want to color grade. There's that great autofocus, the great in-body stabilization. I'm impressed by the specs, even if I have not fully explored them all yet. And so there's not a whole lot that I can speak to here from personal experience, I'm sorry to say. Okay, it is time for my 3 main complaints about the Nikon ZF, and each one leads to the next. The first is the camera's weight. The ZF has premium build quality, I've said that, but that build quality comes at a cost. This camera is surprisingly heavy. At 710 grams, or about 1.5 pounds, it weighs 60% more than the little crop sensor Nikon ZF-C, and it's about 28% heavier than the Fujifilm X-T5, which is one of its primary competitors. And that's pretty hefty for a camera that you might want to walk around with all day shooting handheld. My second criticism, and by far the biggest criticism, is the ergonomics on this camera. The ZF doesn't have a grip so much as it has a bump. And when you combine that with the weight, this is not a camera that you're going to want to carry around all day right out of the box. And so you'll either want to use a strap or do what I did and what I think most people are doing, which is to get the small rig grip that is made specifically for this camera. Nikon sells this even on their own site. They know that this is, I don't know, they seem to know that this is necessary. Obviously, this grip is going to add yet more weight to this already heavy camera, but it is worth it. And then my third criticism is about how the small rig grip interacts with the camera. When the grip is on, it is not easy to get the SD card out of the camera. Maybe it's easier with smaller fingers or with long fingernails. That actually came out not too bad. Not too bad. But I often struggle with it a little bit more. It's recessed too far. The battery door kind of gets in the way. It's because I have slightly longer fingernails right now. Despite the frustrations, still absolutely get the small rig grip. Trust me. Here's how I would summarize my experience with the ZF after 1 year. When I got this camera, I got more than I bargained for. Underneath the stylized, and I would say stylish exterior, is a very versatile camera with very impressive capabilities. There may be nothing this camera can't do and can't do well. Over the past year, I have used this camera for so many different types of photography. I've done street photography, senior portrait sessions, landscape photography, macro photography. I took pictures of my family. I took it to the beach. I made photos at night. I also shot a ton of sports photography with this, making use of that great 3D tracking. I also used this camera to take one of my favorite photographs of all time. And I like this photograph so much because with the player silhouetted against the colorful sky, it looks like this could be anywhere in the world. Just kids out playing soccer or football until the sun goes down. And recently, the already impressive capabilities of this camera got even better because the 2.0 version of the firmware introduced a dedicated bird detect autofocus. The Nikon ZF also offers these little details that I haven't even gotten into yet. Like there's a dedicated black and white switch, that I use all the time. I actually love it, all out of proportion to what a small thing it is. I just think it's great. Even the shutter thread where I can add my favorite soft shutter buttons to it. But who is this camera for? It's for more people than may realize it, and that's maybe the bottom line of this video. The ZF's versatility, I think, is underappreciated. If you like the vintage styling but also want the latest tech, I think this camera is absolutely worth checking out. If you still love shooting film, SLRs, or just appreciate how an analog experience can kind of make for a more thoughtful shooting experience, you should definitely explore the ZF. But as we've discussed, you don't have to rely on the dials for controlling shutter speed and ISO. You can do all of that with the command dials, and it's going to feel a lot more like a conventional mirrorless camera. Should you get it, you'll have to think about your own preferences and use case. Am I happy that I bought it, even considering the weight, the ergonomics, the annoying SD card access? 100%. Lately, Nikon's business approach seems to come down to one word, and that is over-deliver. It is trickling down tech and features from its flagship cameras, the Z9 and the Z8, into their mid and lower tier cameras like the Nikon ZF. Then Nikon makes those cameras better and better with the introduction of substantive firmware updates. At this point, I am self-conscious about sounding like a fanboy. I'm a fan of what Nikon is doing right now, but I'm not a fanboy, if that makes sense. A camera for me is ultimately a tool. And with the ZF, Nikon has made a tool that gets the job done. And it actually gets a lot of jobs done, as it turns out. But it's also a tool that, for me at least, is an absolute pleasure to use. And there's nothing wrong with that. All right, that's it. Have you used the Nikon ZF? What has your experience been so far? Are you curious about the camera? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, friends, and I'll see you in the next video.